Hey everybody, LeGrand here, and this is a very important lesson that I'm going to do today because I'm going to compare cashing out of houses versus not cashing out of houses, and along the way I'm going to teach you a little bit about my Work for Equity program, and what you're going to see here is my favorite exit strategy. I discovered this probably 20 some odd years ago now, and I've been doing it ever since, right up to this very day. You're going to see why I try to avoid doing rehabs on houses, and I accidentally discovered along the way that I make so much more money when I don't rehab them than when I do rehab them. Let's see if you agree with me by the time I get through going through my examples here in this lesson. Now, let's start with a house that has an ARV, or an after repaired value, of $150,000. That's the one I'm going to put on the board here, and that's the example we're going to use. And our purchase price on this property, because we bought it as a bank repo, is about $80,000, which you can buy all over the country right now for that price if they need $15,000 worth of work. That's the repairs, is $15,000. Now, $15,000 worth of work to us looks like about 30 or 40 to most people. So this is $15,000 if we were to hire a contractor and let them do the work. So we got a $150,000 house that we paid $80,000 for that needs $15,000 in work. I'm taking a look here at my profit versus cashing out versus work for equity, putting a lease option tenant buyer in, which I'll explain in a moment. So I've got two columns. So what I'm looking at here is what is the net profit if I buy it, rehab it, sell it to a qualified buyer, and then cash out of it. And that's what I'm getting to my bottom line here. What most people don't add in, especially when they're new, is the cost, the other cost as we call them, of actually doing a transaction where I'm cashing out immediately looking for that qualified buyer. I'm going to come back to those here in just a second, but I can tell you from experience that the number you should use here is approximately 20% of the ARV. Now I know that's a staggering number and I know you're going to dispute it, but before you dispute it, in fact, let's just go down there now. If you'll scroll down there to the bottom, Jamie, let's just look at what these costs are. First of all, you've got closing costs that you're going to pay some of the day you buy. Even if you buy it from a bank, you've got some cost to purchase it on your column. Now this has nothing to do with the purchase price. This is just the closing cost to buy it. However, your biggest hit for closing costs is going to come when you sell it. The problem with cashing out of houses today, especially in the $150,000 price range, is that the buyers are going to expect the seller to pay a large portion of the closing costs because FHA, Fannie Mae, and USDA will allow that to happen. So you can expect that several $1,000s is going to drop into your column if you want to get this house sold. And don't be under the impression that you're so good that you're not going to pay the closing costs because you refuse to. Well, remember, there's such a thing out there as a marketplace, and when all of the other sellers and all of the other investors are willing to pay the closing costs to get their houses sold and you're not, that puts you at an extreme disadvantage. And I would submit to you, will probably cost you more in holding the property and in lost profits than you're going to wind up paying in the closing costs anyway. On this example right here, my best guess is you've got about $5,000 to $6,000 in closing costs on the buyer's side that you're going to absorb in addition to your closing cost. So don't sell me short here with this $30,000 number. It seems like a lot on a $150,000 sale, but a good chunk of that's going to just get eaten up in closing costs alone. All right, in addition to that, you got taxes and insurance. You say, well, what taxes? Well, not income taxes, property taxes. Property taxes are going to accrue on this property for the time you own it, and even though you don't pay them out of pocket, they still come out of the closing proceeds because they're going to prorate your taxes at the time you sell the property. So you're going to wind up paying them regardless of whether you write a check for them or not. Of course, the same with insurance. Now when you insure a non-owner occupied property that you're rehabbing, your insurance is considerably higher than when you're insuring a tenant occupied property like we're going to do over here in a minute. So I can't give you a number because that's going to vary all over the country, but I'd say that you could easily have $1,000 wrapped up in insurance just in the holding time that you're going to keep the property while flipping it. And then you got the maintenance and the utilities. Like somebody's got to mow the lawns, somebody's got to go put the signs up, put the lock boxes on it, and then of course, if you live in the north and you're in the wintertime, utilities are a big deal. I mean, literally several $100s a month you could be spending on the houses, keeping the pipes from freezing. So these things add up very quickly. But here's the big one, and that's interest. If you're going to do this transaction, you're going to probably borrow private money from a private individual lender to do it. We'll come back to that in a moment. But when you do that, you're going to have interest. So that's going to be several $1,000s on the time that you're going to take to get in and get out of this project while you're holding it. Regardless of whether your interest is accruing or whether you're writing a monthly check for it, however you're doing it, you're still going to have the cost of the interest. Remember, we're figuring profit and loss here. I'm going to come back to cash flow here in a minute. So this is just what we should net out of this property based on these assumptions. And then of course, there's that hedge factor, or Murphy factor as I call it. Do not think that Murphy will not be part of your deal. Murphy's a part of all deals. That sucker's got a condo everywhere I go. It's just this simple. If it can go wrong, it probably will go wrong. It will probably take a lot longer than you anticipate and cost more. That's a simple rule of business if you incorporate Murphy into your life, and you should. So don't forget the Murphy factor. Now what that means is this. Let's suppose it doesn't sell for $150. Let's suppose you have to drop the price, $5,000 to get the buyer to say yes. Remember, if you're selling here, you're selling to qualified buyers who can get a loan. That means they're picky. That means they can go anywhere in the neighborhood that they want, or in other neighborhoods in this price range that they can qualify for, and pick a property, and probably some of them have a realtor attached to them, and they make them even more picky because they have such a big supply of properties out there right now. They're making the demands. It is absolutely a buyer's market. So for you to think that you're going to sell this property and not take a discount is probably not a good business assumption. Maybe you will, maybe you won't. I try not to, but I can tell you I expect to discount every property that I put on the market if I'm trying to sell it for all cash. In reality, I hardly do this anymore. I've done hundreds like this, and I can't tell you, after discovering what I'm about to show you, how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars it cost me because I thought this was the only way you could buy and sell houses. All right, now, let's add up our numbers. We got a $150,000 sales price, $80,000 purchase price, $15,000 repairs, and $30,000 in all these costs that I just described down here. That leaves me a net of $25,000. Now look, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with netting $25,000 on a rehab. However, don't forget Uncle Sam. If you're doing this, you're going to pay short-term capital gains, and that right now is 35%. And of course, that's going to go up, so it's even going to get worse. 35%, oh, you say, well, Ron, I'm not in the 35% tax bracket. Then I will say, oh, yes, you are. If you do 2 or 3 of these a year, you're automatically in the 35% tax bracket. So let's just assume for now that is your tax bracket, and if it isn't, it doesn't make much difference here in the big picture. If I'm in 35% tax bracket, it's going to cost me $8,750 to send to Washington. That leaves me a net of $16,250. Now make note of that, because that's an important number, and I'm going to come back to it. That's what I'm going to wind up with after I pay the government. Now let's compare it to my Work for Equity lease option program. First, let me describe what this is. I learned a long time ago that there's a whole subculture of people out there that would love to move into this house, do the work themselves with their labor and their money spent on materials, if I give them an incentive to do that. Well, I'm giving them 2 incentives actually. Number 1, I'm going to give them a little discount on the price, because if I put somebody in this house on a lease purchase on a Work for Equity program, I'm only going to put them in there at about $140,000. Now, it cost me $15,000 to renovate this if I did it myself, but remember, I'm not renovating it. And this $15,000 that I would spend on a contractor means that I'm hiring it and I'm doing all the fancy stuff, staging the house, the whole works. Well, see, I'm not doing any of that here. I'm selling it as is, where it is, and I'm lease optioning it to the tenant buyer, giving them all the time they need to move in, fix it up with their money, and the good news is they don't have to fix it up as nice as I'd fix it up. They only have to fix it up nice enough to get this, the lender to approve a loan. They don't have to do a lot of the things that I have to do over here. So in reality, what would cost me $15,000 would actually cost them about $2,000 worth of materials. They're going to do less work, and they're not going to buy as nice a stuff or as much stuff. And they see that. So I'm giving them, in this case, $10,000 discount on the price for them in exchange for them taking several months while I lease purchase it to them, let them do the work with their time and their labor. These are very easy to sell, very easy to sell. Now let's look at our numbers. If I sold this thing for $140, as is where is, that's important. And this is a special lease option agreement, incidentally, that is on your Gold Club membership site under the resource section, and it's labeled Work for Equity. That's the agreement you'd want to use to put a tenant buyer in this house. Now, look here. I had to pay $80,000 for both houses, which means I had to go get a private loan, granted, but I had to do that regardless of which choice I made. However, in this case, I don't have to spend $15,000 on repairs now because I'm not repairing the house. The tenant buyer is repairing the house. So that's an expense that I don't have to bear. And in addition to that, all these other costs over here that I showed you down here, some of them I'm going to have. Like I'm going to have closing costs when I buy it. I'm going to try to eliminate my closing costs when I sell it because I'm not in a hurry to cash out of it right now. I am going to wind up paying taxes and insurance, but the tenant buyer is going to pay me rent when they move in this house immediately, plus a deposit. So not only are they covering my taxes and insurance, but they're going to cover my interest payment, and I'm still going to have a nice positive cash flow left over. So yes, it's an expense to me, but it's washed out with income. I do not have that luxury over here. There's nobody paying me rent. Maintenance and utilities, of course, that's totally 100% their responsibility. I'm not touching the house. And yes, I'm even going to pay interest, but again, it's covered with rent. Over here, it's covered with nothing. I mean, there's nobody paying me anything, so the interest is totally my expense. The hedge factor, most of it's going to go away because they're not going to argue with me about this price. I'm not going to discount it. I'm not going to pay a big chunk of their closing costs for them, and I'm not going to do a lot of the things that I'd have to do over here. I don't have to worry about cost overruns here because I don't have any cost. I'm not renovating the property. So all of these things that I worry about over here that consume my profit, I just don't have on this side. Now I confess that I may have some cost here, but I don't know what they are yet. And so I'm not going to put anything there for right now. But if I do put a little, it's not going to make much difference. If I put $5,000 here instead of $30,000, I think you're still going to like the numbers at the bottom line. In my example, if I start with a 140 sale and I pay 80, I have no repairs, I have no other costs, I'm going to net 60. I'm going to net 60 here pre-tax, where I netted 25 here pre-tax. I think you're beginning to see that option 2 looks a little bit better than option 1 already. But get this, over here I'm in a 15% tax bracket because I did not cash out the first year. I'm in long-term capital gains here, which means I'm going to pay less than half the income tax I pay over here. So if I got a total, when I cash out, and by the way, I don't even pay taxes here until I cash out, which I'm going to program for my example to be 2 years from now. You see the goal, put the tenant buyer in the house, give them plenty of time to do the work, while simultaneously helping them get their credit cleaned up, which we don't do. We put a mortgage broker on them and we let them get their credit cleaned up. Realistically, I want that to take more than a year. Many times it takes less than a year, but I want it to take more than a year because I don't want to have to pay these short-term capital gains. So I might force it to take more than a year. So, regardless of when I close, as long as it's after a year, I'm only going to have $9,000 worth of taxes opposed to $8,750 over here with only a 25 profit. So in a nutshell, I net 51 here and I net 16,250 here after taxes. Now I'm not sure, but I think this side is better than this side. This is a lot more money and a lot less work, which we're going to come back to here. But I know what you're asking. If you want to go ahead and take a photograph of that whole chart there, I know I went through it kind of quick, but you're going to have to study this chart and apply your own numbers to it. But I don't care what you apply to it, you're always going to find this column is a whole lot better than this column. Now, I wish somebody had told me this before I sold about 500 of these and gave away so much money. All right, let's turn over here now to, well, what about my cash flow, Ron? How am I going to keep cash coming in? How am I going to pay the bills? How am I going to feel like I'm making any headway if all I'm doing is putting tenant buyers in my houses over here and I'm not getting cashed out? Well, let me answer that for you right now. Let's take a look at the cash flow. Let's assume that on this $150,000 ARB house that we go get a $105,000 private loan from an individual and we pay 7%, which by the way, don't pay more than that right now. Guys, gals, that is 14 times what they're getting in a bank account right now. There's no reason for you to pay more than 7% to a private lender. Now listen, I'm talking about a private lender, not a mortgage broker, not somebody in the mortgage business. I'm talking about a human being, an individual. Now, I'm going to do a lesson here soon, coming up. I'm going to show you how to go get these private lenders to come to you. But if you've got any of my materials, you've got scripts in there where you can just start calling the people you know, and you're probably going to line up all the private money you want if you just use my scripts, because you don't need that much of it to do some of these deals. Now in this case, I'm going to borrow this private loan, and I'm going to get at least a 3 or 4 year term on it, but I'm going to pay interest-only payments every month because I know I'm going to put a tenant buyer in the house. If I were going to be in the quick flip cash mode, I'd have the interest accrue where I don't have any payments, but since I know I'm going to collect rent, I'm going to go ahead and structure it so that I'm paying out $613 a month interest only. Principal does not go down, so in my 3, 4, 5 year term, I'll owe 105, not 105 plus accrued interest. So I'm going to pay out $613 a month, and I'm going to put a tenant buyer in here, probably for around $1,000 to $1,100 a month. And they pay the first month's rent the day we close the lease option agreement. So I'm going to collect a non-refundable deposit from them of some amount, plus the first month's rent, or they're not getting in the house. Yes, they're doing the work with their money, but they're still not getting in without paying rent. Don't fall for any of them sad stories about how, well, let me move in and then I'll pay you and let me give it some time and fix it and then I'll start. No, 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 no. They pay you before you give them the key, or they do not move in, period. How do you think I learned that one? All right, so let's just take my private loan here. I borrowed 105 from a private individual. I gave them a great rate of return, and incidentally, this is about a 70% loan-to-value ratio of 150. So I'm leaving 30% of the equity above that loan. Easy loan to get. Take out my purchase price. Now watch me here. I'm going to close the loan and the purchase at the same closing table, just like you do every house you've ever bought for your entire life. You close the loan and the purchase at the same time. That's all I'm doing here. So at the time I close the purchase for 80, I'll be closing the loan for 105. And my math tells me that the purchase price is less than the loan amount, so there's got to be some money distributed somewhere. Now, I'm going to put $15,000 into my own repair escrow account because, guys and gals, please do not take that money and spend it. Why? Because the house has not been renovated. Do I intend to renovate it? No. But I still want to make sure we set the money aside to renovate it if things change or if Murphy creeps in and I can't find that work for equity buyer that Ron tells me that is out there. So set this money aside for now. So I borrow 105, I pay 80 at closing, I set aside 15, and that still leaves me $10,000 less whatever closing costs I have here to purchase it to put in my pocket. This is cash. This is cash flow that I can use. Now it's not profit because I haven't sold the house yet, but it is cash that I can call my own. So keep in mind, this is my first hit of cash that I can spend. And I'll also point out to you, when did I get this cash? The day I bought it or the day I sold it? The answer is the day I bought it. So I'm getting this $10,000 way earlier than I'm getting this $16,250. This $16,250 or this $25 before taxes is going to take me several months to get. I'm getting this $10 right now, the day I buy the property. So let's move on down. When the repairs are done by my tenant buyer who's paying me monthly rent, I can then go take that $15,000 out of that escrow account if I choose to, and I can call that my money as well. By the way, there is no escrow account from outside source because this is not a mortgage broker deal. There's nobody forcing me to set up this account. I'm going to do it because it's a smart business thing to do. I'm going to make sure that that cash does not get away, that it's set aside until the house is repaired. But doesn't mean I have to do the repairs. So when the repair list is done, that I give my tenant buyer, and I do give them a list, I can call out my money if I want to. Or I can just leave it in the bank and wait till the house cashes out, then it's certainly my money. However, when I put a tenant buyer in the house, I'm also going to get a non-refundable deposit from them. On a $150,000 house that needs work, I'm going to get somewhere between $3,000 and $7,000 non-refundable deposit toward them applied to their down payment, but it's still cash in my pocket the day I receive it. Now listen, guys and gals, by the time I close this purchase 30 days after I put it under contract, I should easily have a tenant buyer lined up to go in it. So that I'm likely going to close the lease purchase to my tenant buyer the same day or the day after I close the purchase of the property from the bank. Now, I do have a little showing issue, so if I can't show the house, then I'll go ahead and close it, and then I'll put this tenant buyer in there a few days later, and I'll send them by to take a look in the windows, and if they say they like it, I try to close it the same day, but if they don't, worst case, I wait a few days and close the lease purchase. Either way, I'm going to get this $5,000 either on the day I purchase or very shortly thereafter. That $5,000 is my money, so that adds to my cash flow. So we got $10,000 from the loan. Forget the $15,000, it's in an escrow account. I got $5,000 that I get to call my own. So I got $15,000 on the front end of this deal, opposed to $16,250 on the back end of the deal. So guys, I'm already almost up to the cash I received on this deal. If we do after taxes, then I am over here if I get one payday. Remember, over here I only get one check. Boom. And then I got to pay taxes, and that's what's left over. Over here I'm going to get multiple streams of income, and I like multiple better. So to recap, 10 the day I buy it, 15 in escrow, 5 from the tenant buyer. So I got $15,000 in cash I can call my own, plus 15 sitting there. Now if I'm going to put a tenant buyer in this house, and we're going to use our 2-year period, then I'm going to have a positive cash flow. So I just plugged in that over a 2-year period, I will collect about $10,000 more than I pay out for interest, taxes, and insurance. And if you'll do your math, I'm pretty close. You can adjust it whatever way you want to adjust it. So I get 10 when I get 10 over the 2-year period on a monthly basis. I get 5 the day I put it in, and I get 10 the day I close the loan to purchase it. Now, when they do cash me out, when my mortgage broker gets them approved for a loan, and when they get the repairs done, which I really only give them 2 or 3 months to get the repairs done, and they do cash me out, I got another $30,000 coming on the back end. That's $135,000 that they owe me. Remember, I sold it to them for $140. They gave me 5 down, so they owe me $135. That $135 minus the $105,000 loan that I owe leaves $30,000 coming to the closing table. I've been paying interest on my loan, so I only owe the principal amount. So I get $30 on the back end. Look, $70,000 cash on this entire deal through the life of it, coming to me, $70,000 cash opposed, and that's pre-tax, that is pre-tax, opposed to $25,000 pre-tax. So I'll give you a couple of minutes and you decide, tell me which one of these you like the best so far. Right, now, also, when I put tenant buyers in houses, many of them will default. And in fact, you better count on it, that when you're putting people in these kind of houses, they have to get the work done, and then they have to get qualified for a loan. A lot of them will default. Is that a good thing? Well, I don't know. You'll have to make that decision. To me, it is a good thing. To you, you might think it's a bad thing because you see that $30,000 still hanging out there. But guys, listen to me. It's in your best interest if you just leave that $30,000 hanging out there and forget that it exists, and quit trying to kill the goose that lays the golden egg. Don't forget, you're getting a pretty good monthly cash flow from this property every single month. And every time a tenant buyer moves out, you get to move another one in on a work for equity and collect another $5,000 deposit. You don't get these golden eggs if you kill the goose, just remember. All right, so now let's take a look at the pros and cons, or the upside or the downside. Let's look at the upside. I think I've demonstrated you get a lot more money and you get a lot less work. More deals? You bet. You can do 2 or 3 or 4 of these work for equity deals for every one of those rehab deals you do. By the way, I don't have anything against rehabs. I did one here recently on a house, and we'll probably cash out of it. But I can tell you that I don't want to make my business nothing but rehabs. I think all of you probably should be doing a rehab or two, but I don't want you to rely on that because there's an awful lot of costly entanglements and disappointments and delays that you can't handle. I can do a lot more deals because remember, I'm in and out of this deal on the same day or within a few days because my tenant buyers are lined up and I'm going to build a buyer's list and plug them right in. So I can do a lot more deals with less work and make a lot more money. I don't have to do any rehabs, and I don't have to worry about picky buyers or picky banks because I'm already catering to people with credit issues. I'm going to help them get it cleaned up, which means I'm turning them over to my mortgage originator and they're going to do it for me. And so I don't put up with any crap from them. They don't get an opportunity like this very often. So they're a lot less picky than people who can qualify for a loan. So when they go get ready to get cashed out, I'm going to leave that between them and my mortgage originator. In my world, I don't push them to cash me out because I don't really care if they do or not. In your world, you might want to push them to cash out because you just can't stand having that $30,000 left in that property. Okay, fight off that urge. Remember, your cash flow issues are fixed here. If I were you, I'd leave that alone and leave it in the house. And watch this now, you can keep these houses. There is no law says you have to cash out of them. Now look, if you put a tenant buyer in there and they get the work done and they go get a loan and they're ready to cash out, then you should do everything you can to help them. But you don't have to. I do not push them to cash out. If they do, they do. If they don't, they don't. And the reason being, because all the time they're in there, they're paying for this house, they're maintaining this house. Please remember this, when I put a tenant buyer in my house, they are responsible for 100% of the repairs for as long as they're in it, period. I don't touch it. I've got a couple of houses right now where I've had tenants in it for over 9 years, and I haven't touched these houses. Haven't touched them. Incidentally, does this work for equity thing apply on houses that I take over the debt subject to, or even houses I lease option from the seller? The answer is yes. I don't have to go get a private loan. How many times have you had a chance or have you gotten houses that needed work on them, but you didn't have the money or couldn't raise the money to do the repairs? Well, fine. Just plug a lease option tenant buyer into them, and then you don't have to worry about doing the repairs. Okay, look at the downside. You don't get cashed out now. Some people would say that's a downside. I'd say that's an upside. You still got more cash throughout the deal than you got total on the rehab deal. Remember, $70,000 versus $25,000. So $75,000 is better. Now you do have to have tenants. Well, so what? I find that when I put tenant buyers in houses, that's totally different than putting tenants in houses. Remember, these people have a financial stake in the house. They've done work with their own hands, they bought their own materials, and they have something to lose if they don't buy the house. Totally different than a tenant. So I have no problem with tenant buyers. They're not an issue for me, and they're just in a totally different league. I have problems with tenants because I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and if they don't have a financial stake, they don't act like buyers. These people act like buyers. So, that's it. I know you're going to have questions on them. Go ahead and submit them. I'll get answered. And I do have a course on this work for equity thing. You get a chance to get it. Very inexpensive course. It's an all-day seminar where I taught that whole part of the business. And I would submit that you are going to need that because it's literally got step-by-step instructions, but also the forms and tools in there to get through this thing correctly. And you're going to need to inspect this house from time to time or send somebody out, and you're going to need these people from keep them from taking advantage of you. So anyway, you'll get an opportunity to purchase that and make up your own decision. Again, we will have some private lending lessons coming up. I get that question all the time, so I'll try to address that as well. But let me point out again, I don't have to buy this house with a private loan. For example, I could have taken this $150,000 house and let's say I took over a $115,000 debt on it subject to, but it needed 10-15 and work. I could have done the exact same thing, plug tenant buyer in, get out, collect money, and not have to worry about all the costly entanglements. So there you have it. Cash out versus keep the house. One more thing. Let's just suppose that you didn't want to put a work for equity tenant buyer in there. Remember, you can always do this. You can take this 15 and renovate this house if you wish to. It is true. It takes $15,000 out of your bottom line. But hey, it's not true because I get to raise the 140 price to 159. If I'm selling this thing renovated on a lease purchase, I'll sell it for 159, not 150. Have no problem getting it because it's not about the purchase price. It's about the down payment and the monthly payment that I put them in the house with. I'll just put them in the house, get them qualified over time, so the 15 that I put into repairs comes back to me in increased purchase price. So it doesn't cost me more this way. But then I'd have to ask you, why would I want to renovate it when I can make more money not renovating it? And so far I haven't come up to an answer to that one yet. I'm always going to go work for equity first. If it needs repairs, that's the way I'm going to sell it. You make your own decision. So give me some questions and I'll see you soon. Next lesson, I don't know what the next lesson's about yet, but watch for it closely. Thanks for tuning in.